This is Macro Analytics, delivering frank conversations on global macroeconomics and market analysis outside the mainstream, featuring discussions and debates between Gordon T. Long, publisher and editor of GordonTLong.com, and his guests. The content of this discussion is strictly the opinion of the participants. It is in no way a solicitation for business, nor is it to be considered investment advice of any sort. Always consult a registered investment advisor before making any investment decision. These discussions are extremely hard-hitting and terribly frank, and parental discretion is advised. Now, on to the show.
Good morning. I'm Gord Long with GordonTLong.com, and I have with me this morning Ty Andros. Ty is the president of TraderView, publisher of the TEDbits website, and writer and editor of his well-recognized newsletter, also named TEDbits. Good morning, Ty. Welcome back here. We were just in the middle of our conversation when I had to break. If we could just pick up from where we were in our discussion, Attack of the Locusts and our something-for-nothing societies.
Well, thank you for having me again, Gord. This is a really important concept for people that think there's going to be recovery. And of course, there can be, some recoveries along the way, but right now we just know that we're headed for absolutely, the end. And we don't know if that's going to take 2 years or 10 or 15, but the destination is immovable. And so what I'm going to do, Gord, is just go quickly to that second element, which is the publicly controlled school system and dumbing down of kids. When I was a kid, schools were controlled by the local and state governments. And the curriculum was set with between the teachers and parents. And that was really important because, you see, if the kids didn't learn, they knew that the teachers knew that they were within arm's length of the parents. And, when somebody can grab you by the neck, it's a great focusing device. But now that all of the schools are controlled by faraway forces in Washington, D.C., they're really outside the grasp of the local kids, the parents. And so that they're able to do so many things and get away with it because there's no way to hold them accountable. We've gone centuries creating a classical education. And, it relies on learning self-reliance and hard work, the ability to solve problems, perseverance, logic, reading, writing, and arithmetic at high levels of proficiency, the ability to think for yourself so no one can create a fool, and really knowing the lessons of history and doing classical reading. And, of course, this created a wealth of productivity in the United States and Europe, wealth creation, huge middle classes, personal responsibility, and a moral and just society. And we didn't have to be at each other's throats because we all didn't have enough. It was a land of plenty, so it was easy to have a Gentile society. The more educated the public became, the more prosperous and wealth flowed to its citizens. And it was flowed to them in sound money, real private property, which then they reinvested to create the next wave of wealth creation in capitalism.
When I was a young man, I read a number of Ayn Rand's books, Atlas Shrugged, The Fountainhead, and just recently I had the pleasure of seeing Atlas Shrugged 2. I didn't see the first version. I'm going to. And what struck me, and knowing the story and Ayn Rand's writing, but it reinforced to me just how many of the items you just spelled out have eroded and how badly they have eroded, and how the combination of them and what's happened with government control, centralization, and our willingness through collectivism to allow the government to fulfill a role that our founding fathers never envisaged government to have or to do, but how subtle it has shifted. And it's not subtle in the particular movie I saw. It's very clear. And I encourage our listeners, if they have the chance, to see the movie. I won't say the plot is great, but the dialogue is fascinating because there's just so much in every sentence that you can learn from.
Well, the idea of the public school system was to create self-sufficient, reliable, productive, and happy adults. Okay, that's what the objective was. Well, now the objectives changed, Gord, and it's more just the opposite, to enhance the opportunity for government and banksters to prey, victim, and monopolize the citizens.
For years, things such as integrity, honesty, character, values were a cornerstone for a young man, young woman growing up. They were taught in multiple ways, both from the school, often from whatever religious affiliation you had, things such as Sunday school or whatever. I date myself. These were cornerstones. Today, it's not the foundation and the bedrock, and it's only on that that a society can grow and prosper. And going back to your point here on education, Ty. So what's happened now, we're fostering a mentality where perception is reality, and everything is one of show. The emblem you have on your car, the size of your house, whatever, those don't relate with integrity, honesty, character. When a society's shrinking and people are trying to get these things that they think are going to give them happiness. So your system starts to implode.
Well, I had so many problems as we've converted to a something-for-nothing society, because I grew up as a Boy Scout and a Christian, and my bond was my word, and I used to believe other people were like me, and they weren't. Okay, shame is gone. How many people actually get an apology for somebody when they do something to them? I think it's like you can't even hardly count it. Believe me, when I do something to somebody that I wouldn't want done to myself, I feel ashamed. And I am a big enough man to be able to say, I'm sorry, and really mean it. But that's gone. And it's in its place has been substituted useful idiots, political correctness, death of common sense.
I think political correctness really starts to foster that. So people start biting their tongue, and sometimes it's wise that they should, as opposed to really speaking with how they feel and truly feel. And so they start to go along to get along. And there's always a need of that in a society, but we've taken it with this political correctness to such an extent that we've lost our way. And this is how societies start to crumble, and motivations get pulled out, and then suddenly there's the reward systems are not there, and then you have a something for nothing society.
It is an epidemic, and we're really deeply into the process. It's not in its infancy; it's in its demise. And here's what kids have been. The the government controls the public schools and teach dependence on government. Teach childlike trust in government, that you're entitled to something for nothing, whether you earn it or not. Don't teach the lessons of history from the past. Reading, writing, and arithmetics are de-emphasized. People are virtually illiterate when they graduate now. And this has happened over a 30-year period, ever since the Department of Education was created in the last late 70s. And, in its place, they've got put a new Bill of Rights in. And it's the right to a job. It's the right to adequate food and clothing and recreation. I mean, just think, people on welfare have mobile phones and flat screen TVs and microwaves. It's the right of you to sell what you want and get a certain return. It's the right of every businessman to be not have to compete. Okay, the right of every family to have a decent home. Section 8, the right to medical care, Medicaid. The right to adequate, you don't have to be afraid of old age, accidents, or unemployment. Well, why don't you need to be afraid of that? Because when I'm afraid of that, I try to lead a prudent lifestyle. I try to do the things that are necessary, that I don't have those things happen to me. And of course, they tell you they have a right to a good education, but what they substitute is nothing for the sort. And of course, something for nothings believe these things, and they vote for them because it's been taught and sown into them from the earliest stages.
There's no question this is happening. How much of this do you think is planned and orchestrated, or in fact is just happenstance of societies as they mature?
I believe it's the blueprint of progressivism and socialism. And they try to sell something for nothing, and it's how they buy votes and constituencies, and it's now to the point where there's no such thing as a free lunch, and as Margaret Thatcher said, they've run out of other people's money. And of course, we can go right back to the Bible. Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach him how to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime. The public schools quit teaching people how to fish and created people that want fish. They know nothing else and have been taught that capitalism is a boogeyman and they're incapable of providing for themselves, which is nothing further from the truth. Everybody's capable of providing for themselves if they start off early and know that they have to work for it and lead a prudent lifestyle and are given those basic educations that you and I were given, but they don't teach anymore. Quoting Alex Tocqueville, and this is just a frightening thing, but it's true. It is not an endlessly expanding list of rights. The right to an education, the right to health care, the right to food and housing, that's not freedom. That's dependency. Those are not rights. Those are the rations of slavery, hay and barn for human cattle. And we've been turned into a slave society in many ways. We're going to cover them, and these people believe government's there to support them. Most people like you and I won't tamely submit, but we're dying. And the people coming up behind us don't know these things. When I go to conferences and talk and lecture and or go to my Bible studies or whatever it is, okay, it's the most frightening thing that I see is that, after we get down to about 45-year-old people, there's really no youth in the room. They just aren't there. Okay. There's another quote here from Sam Adams. I hope you all read it. But these are all true. And once the public's been impoverished by unsound money and their living standards slip away, their ability to see, understand, and solve problems have been removed. They become ripe for manipulation. Okay, and, they get manipulated by fear and misinformation. And the mainstream media, which is owned by the same people that own the banks and the government, feed these things to get these people to prey on these people's childlike trust in government and banks. Although they're finally beginning to question those things, aren't they?
I have never seen a time that I can recall, I'm getting a little older now, where fear is pushed so hard in the media. And when people are fearful, what happens with that is they're willing to surrender things they wouldn't otherwise surrender to be safe, to be protected, to feel secure. And so whether it's a war on terror, whether it's cyber wars, whether it's currency wars, but there's always these senses of threat. And every night on the news, whether it's violence in a community, whether it's a geopolitical event, frightening feeling pushes those who are not thinking and seeing through this into their willingness to give the government more control so they'll be safe. And it's something we have to stand on guard very carefully with.
I'm sorry, but don't have the ability to think and see through it. Never been taught it. Okay, they don't have that ability. That's why things are, past an event horizon.
That's why I'm speaking to our listeners who wouldn't be listening if, in fact, they weren't of that ilk, that they can see things. But I echo your point. The vast majority of people today, they just don't, and especially the younger crowd. They're completely preoccupied and haven't been instructed and preoccupied with a different value system, and that's a discussion in itself.
Well, on this slide, Gord, we're sitting here looking at what supposedly your weekly earnings are versus, published by the Ministry of Truth in Washington, D.C., versus what is really happening to their standard of living. And if you look at this very carefully, where it shows gains since 1992 in the official statistics, it shows a 30 or 40% drop in living standards during that time. And obviously during that time, people don't know what's going on. They still can buy the car. Okay. They can still have all those things, but you have to go into debt. And of course they print the money out of thin air and lend it to you with interest. And so instead of paying $30,000 for a car with compounding, you're paying $50,000 And of course, this is your future labor. This is money that if you actually had sound money, you'd be paying for it in cash. I pay cash for my cars, but I was taught that by my father. Okay, they don't teach that anymore. Now they just want you to, the economic growth is a function of credit creation. It has nothing to do with creating real wealth. It has to do with robbing you. Doesn't matter whether it's an education, they loan you $100,000 and you go do a student loan and basically all the upside from your additional education, if you actually got one, goes to the bank rather than to you. Because you borrowed 100, you paid back 250, and that could have been the basis for your wealth in retirement. I mean, this next slide that we have here is an excellent slide from Charles Hugh Smith at Of Two Minds, and look at this. College education up 1,100%, medical care up 600%, shelter up 400%. Consumer price index, they say, is up 200. Of course, remember, that's understated. Supposedly food isn't going up as fast as consumer prices. Well, has anybody been to a grocery store over the last 3 years?
Relative to the scale that's there, but to put food into perspective, most of the countries around the world, food is a dominant part of the people's disposable income. Less so in some of the developed countries, less so than here in the United States. So there, any kind of food price increases, which are going up in excess of 10%, and any even official numbers, is crippling. So they're really seeing it on food. They're not seeing it in the education. And all these other things that are above that are all financed too. You know the commonality there, Ty? It's all financed money. As we've completely financialized our economy.
And some things just weren't meant to be financialized, were they?
That's exactly correct.
But you can still have all these things, just you go borrow it and chain yourself to the banksters for virtually the rest of your life. And when it gets to retirement, what should have been your savings and investments are actually their profits.
See, what's happened, Ty, is there is no retirement anymore. Well, first of all, I don't think there's going to be such a thing as inheritance in the distant future. This generation may be the last generation that has inheritance, and it's going to be minor because the money will be spent because the debt has been so large, there's nothing left to give to their kids. And now the newer generation are coming up. There's no defined benefits. They're just contributory benefits, so they don't even have pension plans. They're facing $200,000, $400,000 to get kids through college. They suddenly turn 58, no pensions, and their medical costs are just killing them. And that's assuming that Medicare will be there for them, and I don't think there's any listener that's listening to this show believes that it will be. So they're fearful, and they don't even have the assets, so forget inheritance.
Well, but, let's go back to Marxism, progressivism, socialism. Go look at the tenets. And one of the tenets is that you cannot have inheritance. And they are removing that. Okay?
Precisely, Ty. Precisely.
I mean, it's one of those tenets. I don't know how many there are, 12 or 13. But one of them is there is no passing on generational wealth. It's all the state. And you have to understand, in something for nothing economies, you don't own yourself. You don't own your production. You don't own your wealth. Private property dies. Okay, and we don't have private property today if it was properly put together. And of course, that's killing the incentives of everything you need to create productive people.
Every day they keep advancing. We could have a whole discussion on private property rights centered out of what just happened in Cyprus. Every day there's another pillar that collapses as we move towards not having any rights, not having any personal property, not having inheritance.
Well, my newsletter today that's going out is called Reality Bites. It's about the specter of things to come, and I touch on that these people, your bank accounts, your money, your homes, that's not your property in their mind. They won't tell you that, but that's the one of the operating principles that they're doing. Okay, and if people really understood it, and I put up a graph here from Shadow Stats. Really shows there's been really no growth since 2000. We had a brief period in 2004 where we barely peaked above the zero growth line after inflation. But for the most part, this economy is collapsing, and it has been on a compounded annual basis. And this is the face of impoverishment. I put up a thing showing the percentage of people out of work in real terms, the percentage of people that are on food stamps, and the percentage of people that are going on disability. And I urge you to stop the tape and take a look at it. And then I showed the underlying deterioration in the American economy in just 5 years since the chosen one in the White House took the White House. And remember, the first 2 years of his term, he had supermajorities, veto-proof, and they put in place so many things that are just slowly but surely unfolding in society and wrapping itself around it like a python. And it is squeezing the life out of the future and transferring it to themselves. I mean, the chosen one and those group came right out of Chicago. And, they have been writing what they learned in Chicago large across the nation. And then, of course, this is the face of the welfare state and their constituents consuming the capital needed to invest in the future and the future's incomes of our children. And let me just, I hope everyone's sitting down. But the liability per taxpayer is $1,087,705. Do you think the president would have been reelected if he went around saying, or someone would have just run an ad saying, they say that the deficit doesn't matter, that there's plenty of room. But what do you think people would do if they knew that he borrowed $30,000 for every man, woman, and child over the last 4 years? Do you think that might be a frightening prospect for somebody that doesn't make $50,000 a year?
If they understood it, Ty, if they thought about it, what we've already showed, they probably wouldn't, because they just don't think that it means anything to them. It does.
They've been told all their lives that they don't have to pay for it. Somebody else will pay.
That's the feeling. Somebody else is going to pay for it. Therefore, we've allowed our freedoms to be surrendered, and our responsibilities and our accountabilities for these things. We're entrusting them to the government, which is totally and absolutely incorrect. And therein lies the flaw. The way to look at it is, I love my country. I just have a real problem with my government, and they're becoming predators. Not becoming. They are being predatory. Whether intentional, whether planned, we can debate that. What needs to be seen is they are.
They're a reflection of their constituents.
That very well said, Ty. That's exactly how I look at it, too. Don't point the finger at the government. Point it at ourselves first. Because one thing I know about government, they will do the quickest and easiest solutions to anything, and what motivates them is voter antagonism and voter activism. So we have the power. And unless we educate ourselves and get involved and express ourselves, these sort of things are naturally going to happen. So look in the mirror. That's our problem. Ty, we're up against our hard line. A great discussion. I really appreciate it. Any last closing comments, conclusions you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I put some conclusions up. I urge you to read them because they are conclusions. And I also put up the path to poverty in something for nothing societies, and you'll see this through everything you look at. And I urge you to look at those last 2 slides. But this is a pathology. It's a snowball rolling downhill, and there's nothing that can stop it. The only thing that's going to stop it is Mother Nature, and she's going to stop it just like she stopped it in China, and just like she stopped it in Soviet Union, and just like she stopped it in the Weimar Republic. And that's by such crushing poverty that they have to try something else. But until they run into that brick wall, watch out.
Ty, could you tell our listeners how they could learn more about your writings, where they could get access to your writings, and the kinds of things that you do on a day-to-day basis that really address some of the things you've talked about?
Well, I publish the TEDBits newsletter, and subscriptions are free at traderview.com or tedbits.com. And I am an absolute return alternative investment specialist, which is quite a mouthful, but what it really means is that I know how to stop the printing press. I'm good at restoring the functions of money and restoring your money to sound money from unsound money. And I do it the same way it's been done throughout history, putting gold and silver behind it, and with certain techniques. And then what I do is I'm a manager of managers and an asset allocator. And I find people that work in the most liquid markets in the world that have developed systems to make money when markets are rising or falling or going sideways. And their sole job, because they're incentive based, is to put you into recognize opportunities using their systems, put your account into those opportunities at a low risk entry point, and then professionally manage the risk. And by professionally managing the risk, they're able to share in the profits, and they get paid after they've made them. And so I put together investments that I think can withstand the winds of the printing press and make money when markets rise, fall, or go sideways. It's a critical component of diversification, I believe.
Ty, we'll wrap now. I'm looking forward to having you back again next month. I don't even know what we'll be talking about next month because things keep changing so quickly, but I'm looking forward to it. Talk to you later.
Thank you, Gord, for having me. I look forward to coming back again.
Bye-bye.
This has been Gordon T. Long, editor and publisher of GordonTLong.com. New recordings are posted regularly and can be found at GordonTLong.com. New show notifications are available through RSS feed, iTunes, and other social networking venues at GordonTLong.com.